Magandang araw at pagbati. Ako si 𝐌𝐠𝐚 𝐍𝐚, convener ng Manila Studies Program ng CAS UP Manila. At palugod naming inihahandog sa inyo ang MNL o mga natatanging lektura. Halika, ating panoorin ang mga piling panayam upang mas pagyamanin pa ang ating kaalaman tungkol sa araling Maynila.
One of the most dramatic episodes of the history of UP and PGH is what happened during the Second World War.
Magandang araw sa lahat at welcome sa MNL 2025 Mga Natatanging Lektura. Sa pagbabalik ng seryeng ito na hatid ng Manila Studies Program o MSP ng Kolehiyo ng 𝐔𝐏-𝐵𝐚 Universidad ng Pilipinas, Maynila, samahan niyo kaming tuklasin ang ilan pang mga pananaliksik tungkol sa Maynila. Ngayong araw, sasamahan tayo ni Dr. Inocencio Maramba mula sa University of Plymouth para talakayin ang kasaysayan ng UP-PGH sa panahon ng ikalawang digmaang pandaigdig. Dr. Inocencio Daniel Cortez Maramba is a researcher and academic specializing in e-health, health informatics, digital health technologies, as well as having a keen interest in history, particularly Philippine and military history. Dr. Maramba obtained his medical degree from the University of the Philippines College of Medicine, his MSc in Health Information Science from the University of Warwick, and his PhD in Medical Studies from the University of Plymouth. It was during his medical training that Dr. Maramba became interested in the history of the University of the Philippines and the Philippine General Hospital, particularly the events that occurred during the liberation of Manila in 1945. Dr. Maramba has published over 30 papers on e-health and health informatics subjects. This paper on the battle for the University of the Philippines and the Philippine General Hospital is his first submission to a history conference. He hopes to write more papers on historical topics in the future. Ating subaybayan ang kanyang presentasyong pinamagatang The Battle for UP-PGH, 13 to 23 February 1945.
I would like to respectfully dedicate this presentation to the memory of the doctors, nurses, medical personnel, patients, refugees, and liberators who were present at the battle for UP-PGH from the 13th to the 23rd of February 1945. May we learn from their example so that we will be able to persevere even through the most dire adversity and, if needed, rise from the ashes once again. Maraming salamat po.
My presentation today is about the battle for UP-PGH that occurred during the campaign to liberate Manila that started in February 1945. So there's a lot of history behind that. One of the most dramatic episodes of the history of UP and PGH is what happened during the Second World War. So before the war, this is what UP and PGH looked like. Now, of course, the Japanese attacked in 1941 and Bataan fell in April 1942, followed by Corregidor May 6, 1942. So we came completely under the Japanese, although we still had guerrilla activity in parts of the highlands. And the dean and concurrent director of PGH at the time was Dr. Antonio G. Sison. Okay, and because only the College of Medicine remained operational throughout the war. He was the highest ranking UP official during the war. So he became de facto university president. Okay. As 1944 approached and the Americans landed in October 20 in Palo Leyte and took Tacloban and all. So they began already their drive for what General MacArthur, considered to be the main point of his operation in the Philippines, which is the capture of Manila. Okay, and so on January 9, 1945, they landed in Lingayen Gulf, in Lingayen, in Dagupan, Binmaloy, and San Fabian, and started their drive southwards towards Manila. The Japanese decided, in the main, the Japanese were headed by Lieutenant General Yamashita Tomoyuki. They decided to retreat to the Cordillera and Sierra Madre Mountains in the north. So they totally different from the American plan in 1941-42, which is to retreat into the Bataan Peninsula. But unlike MacArthur, Yamashita did not formally declare Manila to be an open city, although he had no intention of fighting the Americans in Manila. He withdrew most of his forces. However, a detachment of around 15,000 or 14,500 naval troops, Imperial Japanese Navy, and around 1,500 army were left in Manila to guard the port area, because they knew that the American objective in capturing Manila was to use the port of Manila as their staging area for the eventual invasion of Japan. So they wanted to deny the use of the port facilities as long as possible to the Americans. Now, the problem with the Japanese command structure is that the Navy has their own command structure separate from the Army. Now, Yamashita is Army. For him to order the Navy to do something, he has to relay the order to Tokyo, and then Tokyo will relay it back. If they agree with what he says, they will relay it back through their naval command to the naval commander. The naval commander in Manila was a man named Rear Admiral Iwabuchi Sanji. And he had an axe to grind against the Americans because he was commander of the battleship Kirishima in Guadalcanal, and his boat was sunk under him during the naval battles in Guadalcanal. And unlike the tradition, he did not go down with his ship. He survived and was very pissed off at the Americans. So he would do anything, to really sort of like retrieve his honor by doing something very drastic, or to inflict as much damage to the Americans as possible. So even when Yamashita ordered all forces out of Manila, and basically telling them, do your job of destroying the port facilities and flee, Iwabuchi decided to stay with his 6,500 men and decided that they would fight to the last man against the Americans. And one of the places that they occupied, in defiance or in contravention of the accepted rules of war included in the Geneva Convention, which, by the way, neither the Americans nor Japanese ratified, although they signed it, but it was never formally ratified, is that they occupied the Philippine General. And that is against the war. You're not supposed to touch medical facilities, use them in any military manner. Dr. Antonio Sison was, as I said, director and dean and de facto university president. And when the Japanese came into PGH, they would give him orders and tell him what to do, oftentimes pointing a bayonet at his chest while they gave him the orders. That's how cruel or how forceful they were. And beyond all these protests, because we have patients here, they emplaced several machine gun nests and other fortifications here at what's now the main pharmacy. Back then it was the dispensary, and then another one here, because this is the nurses' home. So that building just before the nurses' home. So they fortified this building and that building and this building here, which is here it's listed as the College of Pharmacy, but that's actually the annex where physiology, biochem, and pharma are. So now this map was drawn up by Dr. 𝐍𝐚, based on the testimony of Dr. 𝐍𝐚 when he testified at the trial of Yamashita after the war. Okay. And then you have the Bureau of Science here, and this is the College of Medicine. Okay, not shown here, but already existing would be the College of Public Health, somewhere here. And this is the Paura Observatory, the Jesuit Observatory. And that's when they came up against the Japanese. Now, because of the shelling, civilians started to flee their homes. And the one place they wanted to go to, because they knew, one, that they could get medical aid, and two, that it was very strong, was PGH. So the number of civilians and patients, according to the testimony of Dr. 𝐍𝐚, swelled to around 9,000. So this is a picture of Dr. 𝐍𝐚 conferring with the American Council prior to testifying at the Yamashita trial. And so as the Americans advanced southward and eastwards, from the police station and from City Hall, they started encountering resistance as they tried to cross Taft Avenue. So the Japanese opened fire on them, both from the university and from PGH. And so the Americans started firing back. At that time, when the battle started on the 13th of February, the Americans had no inkling about the number of civilians inside PGH. And they knew it was a hospital because they had big red crosses painted on the roof. But whenever spotter planes would fly overhead, the Japanese would force all the civilians inside and prevent them from being seen by the American spotter planes. So they had no idea about the extent of how many civilians inside. And as Dr. 𝐍𝐚 said, he estimates at that time that the battle started, around 9,000 people, patients and refugees, were in PGH. Then at that, there are reports that when night would come, the soldiers would go to places like nurses' home. The Japanese naval military forces, naval troops would try to go inside the nurses' home because that's where female refugees were. And unfortunately, they would attack and molest and even rape the women inside. Repeating what was happening in Bayview and other places of Manila at the time. So around the 15th, so around the second day of the fighting, that's when they discovered that there were civilians inside. And so, but because they could not drive out the Japanese with small arms alone, they would resort to artillery and tanks. So you can see here, there's a M4 tank right there in the driveway of PGH, right near the entrance. And it's firing on the dispensary building. Yeah, the main pharmacy, to drive them out. Okay. So really fierce fighting took place in there. And as they entered the building, they would have to shoot from room to room, window to window. So this is looking towards one run. So this courtyard is still existing. Atrium na, okay. So we're looking towards Ward 1 here, and then here. And they used all sorts of weapons, even bazookas, to drive them out. And later on, you'll see that they employed flamethrowers against the Japanese in the university. I think this is already, they're firing from nurses' home towards UP. So this is one of the dorm rooms in nurses' home. Americans, these are the Americans. So again, the fighting was very fierce. The Japanese gave no quarter and asked for it. No, none of them surrendered. They had to be all killed to the last man. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is that building in front of nurses' home that you can see. So over here on the left would be where the PGH chapel is now. Okay, and there's a dead Japanese soldier there. And you can see that they've already taken off his shoes because those are one of the things that the Filipinos will try to salvage. So by the 17th, the Americans had kind of already assumed control of the hospital buildings, and they started the operation to evacuate the civilians and patients inside. So that was a very arduous operation. The nurses helped. A lot of the PGH doctors and nurses stayed in all throughout the battle. Some of them had no choice. You have people, of course, like Dr. 𝐍𝐚, Dr. 𝐍𝐚 Garcia, who later became Minister of Health. The patients and refugees inside suffered horribly because, of course, there was no food going in. Water was almost non-existent. There was constant shelling. In the accounts of people like Lytton, James Lytton, and Miguel Avancenia, who were children at the time, but their families took shelter in PGH. The place where they hid was in the elevator shaft, the bottom of the elevator shaft of PGH, because for them that was the safest place to hide from the shelling. And they suffered from lack of water. So one of the first things that the Americans did when they arrived was to give them water. And that's one of the first things that they asked for when the Americans finally released. So you can see here, this American is giving a wounded refugee a drink of water before he gets evacuated. Now, one of the casualties on the medical staff side was Dr. Honorato 𝐍𝐚𝐫𝐿, class 1945. He was the president of their class and a Mu Brad. He was killed in the crossfire when attempting to get water for the patients. And sayang talaga because it was on that last day, February 17, when he was killed. Some say that what happened was he and a group of other interns were trying to cross the walkway to Cancer Institute, or well, at that time it's called X-ray Institute, to get water from a well that they knew was there. And they were trying to identify themselves as non-combatants by having a bed sheet painted with a red cross. Unfortunately, it drizzled or it rained and it got wet and the red paint got smeared. So it looked more like a red circle than a red cross. So the Americans thought they were Japanese and opened fire on them as they tried to cross. And that's when Dr. 𝐍𝐚𝐫𝐿 was killed. Yeah, friendly fire. Another thing about Dr. 𝐍𝐚𝐫𝐿 is, according to his family's account, because his father is the botanist, 𝐷𝐿 𝐍𝐚𝐫𝐿, and he did a lot of work on medicinal plants, and he was, I think, the director of Bureau of Science at the time. But he had a lot of his research data there in Bureau of Science. And the Bureau of Science was destroyed. A lot of valuable specimens, research records, data all went up with it. But one thing that was saved by Honorato 𝐍𝐚𝐫𝐿 was his father's research. So we have Dr. Reti 𝐍𝐚𝐫𝐿 to thank for his father's research surviving the war. So after they were able to evacuate PGH and also drove the Japanese out of the Bureau of Science and the College of Medicine, their attention now turned to the UP buildings on Padre Paula. The fighting was so fierce. The initial attacks on PGH were carried out by men of the 148th Infantry Regiment of the 37th Division. But by the time that around the evening of the 18th, they were so worn out, they had to be relieved by the men of the 5th Cavalry Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division. They were the liberators of Santo Tomas. And aided by the tanks of the, well, you saw that tank already, that's from the 44th Tank Battalion. So the tanks stayed there and they continued the assault, this time on the buildings of UP. So the 5th Cavalrymen now had to do the hard work of rooting out the Japanese room by room. By the time that PGH was liberated, they pretty much already taken over or occupied. So they had pretty much occupied Villamor Hall. So they were using that as their base of fire. So not the old Supreme Court building, the one fronting Taft Avenue. They were using that the base of fire to fire on to Rizal Hall, where most of the Japanese were holed up. And if you look in between, what lies in between Villamor Hall and Rizal Hall that is the oblation. So this original concrete oblation, the very first oblation, is now in the third floor of the Diliman Library. Okay, so what you're going to see now is actual footage of the battle to take UP. So there's the oblation. So now the 5th Cavalry troopers are moving out from Villamor Hall. So they're advancing there, making their way past the oblation. You can see the base of the oblation there on the left. And look, so there's a guy with a flamethrower, and you can see how heavy that is because he trips and falls. Because that's, I don't know how many pounds, probably almost 100 pounds of jellied gasoline in those tanks. But that's the only way that they could root out the Japanese. So if you can look on the right, you can see a smoke canister there. So they're advancing under the cover of the smoke. So that's the engineering building in the background, which is now the Court of Appeals. And the tanks rolled into that parade ground. So you've got an M4 there, and I think that's an M18 Hellcat tank destroyer there, nearer to us, and then M4 Sherman composite hull there at the back. The University Library, that's now the Supreme Court, so you can see it's completely gutted. It's part of Rizal Hall there on the right. The PGH, you have a large shell hole there on the left, and you can see that it was marked with a large red cross. So it's obviously a hospital. The dispensary building, so that's the one that was being fired upon by the tank in the previous photograph. Yeah, the main pharmacy. And then this is along Iran or Pedro Hill now. That's from left to right. You've got the annex, College of Medicine main building. That's why I said that's Calderon there in the middle. Yeah. And then in the background, you can see the public health. Okay, again, this is Calderon. Yeah, maybe. Yes. So you can see wala ngayon. And wala pa yung science over there. Oh, Lady Med, wala pa. Okay, and then this is engineering, which is now Court of Appeals. So this is Orosa now. So you can see the buildings really suffered a lot of damage. And if you go into the entrance of College of Medicine, and you look to your left, you'll see this. This part tells the history that these are the planks of the original wooden door of the college. And then because they rescued it from the rubble, then they put this original plaque here, the one that was put in 1910. But you can see that it's been hit by shrapnel and bullets. Okay, and then it was rebuilt in 1946. Okay, then in the center, that's Dorm 5, 𝐶𝐐𝐵 Hall, named after Reti 𝐶𝐐𝐵 because he gave his life.
Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat po, Dr. Maramba. Tunay na ang UP-PGH ay isang mahalagang saksi ng kasaysayan ng Maynila at kabayanihan ng mga Pilipino. Para sa mga nais pang pag-aralan ang kasaysayan ng UP-PGH sa panahon ng ikalawang digmaang pandaigdig, maaari ninyong ma-access ang pananaliksik ni Dr. Maramba sa pamamagitan ng pag-scan ng QR code o pagbisita sa link na matatagpuan sa inyong mga screen ngayon. Ang MNL 2025, Mga Natatanging Lektura, ay isang lecture series na hatid ng Manila Studies Program o MSP, ang Regional Study Center na nakabase sa Kolehiyo ng 𝐷𝐼𝐻 sa Universidad ng Pilipinas, Maynila. Ang MSP ay tinatag upang magtaguyod ng mga pag-aaral at pananaliksik tungkol sa iba't ibang aspeto ng Maynila at kinabibilangang rehiyon nito. Sa mga nakaraang taon, sa pamamagitan ng MNL, Mga Natatanging Lektura series, tayo ay nakapagtalakay ng iba't ibang paksa tungkol sa Maynila. Maaari niyong panoorin ang mga nakaraang episode ng MNL sa pamamagitan ng pag-scan ng QR code na may kita sa inyong mga screen. Ang mga link ng mga episodes ng MNL ay may kita niyo rin sa description box ng video na ito. Maaari nyo ring bisitahin ang aming official YouTube channel at UPM-CAS MSP. Maraming salamat sa panonood at kita-kits sa susunod na episode ng MNL 2025 Mga Natatanging Lektura.